We've all heard the buzzwords: Russian interference, hackers, bots, cyber warfare. Words that send tremors through every institution in the Western world. Blackouts in cities, hospitals going dark, rigged elections, all of it gets brought up whenever Russian hackers enter the conversation. What makes Russian hackers so uniquely dangerous is that they've done their job so well that they've created a state of paranoia, an obsession over whether they interfered in an election, whether they carried out a hack, whether any of it was even real. And they engineered that paranoia deliberately, using fake identities and false trails to keep investigators spinning in circles. But one thing is crystal clear: the threat known as Sandworm is real. To separate fact from fiction, we're drawing from the book Sandworm by investigative journalist Andy Greenberg. Sandworm, of course, is the code name the West gave the group. Their real designation is Unit 74455 of the GRU, Russia's military intelligence agency, operating out of Moscow on Korova Street in the Khimki neighborhood, from Building 22, known simply as the Tower. The FBI has warrants out for several of its officers. This is the story of Sandworm, the global threat that proved, beyond any doubt, just how devastating a cyber attack can be. In this PowerPoint slide, you can see a Ukrainian flag in the background and a list of names written in Cyrillic, supposedly a terrorist watch list. But beyond the blurred names, this slide was hiding something you couldn't see with the naked eye, something only the analysts at cybersecurity firm Eyesight were able to detect. This was no ordinary PowerPoint. The file had been engineered so that simply opening it would execute malware that exploited a never-before-seen Windows vulnerability, what's known as a zero-day, which allowed for remote code execution. A zero-day is a vulnerability unknown to the software manufacturer, one that has no patch yet. It's called that because the developer has 0 days to fix it. Picking apart a PowerPoint file isn't exactly easy. Some analysts describe it as a chaotic mess of layered updates. To manipulate it, you practically have to learn a new programming language. The team at Eyesight got to work fast, trying to figure out what the file was really after. When they finally cracked it open, they found code from a much older piece of malware called Black Energy, originally sold in 2007 on a Russian hacker forum for $40. But this wasn't your run-of-the-mill denial of service attack. There was something more going on. The deeper they dug, the stranger it got. They realized the malware was being controlled from a server with 0 security, meaning anyone could walk right in and look around. Inside, they found a Russian language instruction manual on how to use Black Energy. It appeared the malware had been active for at least a year, but its goal wasn't to destroy anything. It didn't seem to have done anything unusual in all that time. The working theory was that it was gathering intelligence, running reconnaissance. Then, one analyst on the team, Drew Robinson, refused to let it go. Digging even deeper into the code, he found something unexpected: a function named Arrakis-02. If you know your science fiction, Arrakis is the desert planet at the center of the Dune novels. Robinson ran the virus through VirusTotal, a site where you upload files, and they get scanned by dozens of antivirus engines, and got a hit. Part of the malicious code in that PowerPoint matched another piece of malware from the same year, and in that match he spotted another curious detail: a function called House Atreides 94. Again, a reference to Dune, the ruling family of Arrakis in the novels. He kept pulling the thread. More viruses sharing the same code, all of them with Dune references, and the files were mostly targeting Ukraine. At first glance, it looked like a spying operation aimed at Ukraine and NATO. Robinson was a lifelong Dune fan, had been since he was a teenager, so when he ran to his boss to report what he'd found, he called it Operation Bene Gesserit. In the Dune universe, the Bene Gesserit are a mysterious cult-like sisterhood of women with extraordinary abilities. His boss didn't care much about that. It was a mouthful, but he knew from the books that Dune had giant sandworms. That was easier to say, so he called the threat group Sandworm. Now let's talk about that boss, a guy named John Hultquist. Once Hultquist started digging into Sandworm's activity, he became completely consumed by it. He brought it up constantly, at lunch, at events, in his off hours. He was convinced this was the beginning of a new era of warfare, a technological war being waged from Russia, even though he still couldn't definitively prove the Russians were behind it. His entire life revolved around Sandworm. He even showed up to the office dressed as a sandworm. His obsession wasn't unfounded. The Sandworm malware seemed like it was only being used for surveillance, but it carried a far more dangerous potential. It could be used to attack SCADA systems. SCADA systems are the control frameworks that manage industrial machinery, power grids, energy infrastructure, transportation networks. Think of it like a central dashboard where you can monitor and control all of it from one place. These systems are kept air-gapped from the internet precisely because compromising them can have catastrophic real-world consequences. A ventilation system fails in a mine. A cooling system stops cooling. A hospital loses power. The easiest way in is through the engineering tools used to update them. And as far as Hultquist knew, Sandworm already had access to at least one of those tools. What that meant was chilling. These hackers could cause real damage, not just lock a computer or steal data. They could reach into the physical world, knock out a power grid, disrupt an assembly line, interfere with medical equipment. Sandworm's name started picking up traction in the press. Apparently, they'd also hit targets in Poland and France. But the moment they started getting attention, Sandworm vanished. Like a worm burrowing underground, they stripped every Dune reference from their code and went dark. The situation was maddening. These hackers had planted malicious files that appeared to do nothing, sitting dormant across infected systems with the potential to physically damage industrial infrastructure. And unlike most cybercriminals, Sandworm didn't have the ego that usually gets hackers caught. No vanity, no signatures. Following their trail was going to be nearly impossible. And what they were actually after remained a mystery. In November 2015, Hultquist gave a briefing at the Pentagon to a room full of high-ranking officials. He laid out a threat unlike anything ever seen in the history of cybersecurity, and he said the following: "I think there's a real chance they're going to try to cause a blackout." Back in October 2015, Oleksiy Yasinski, head of security at Starlight Media, one of Ukraine's largest broadcasting companies, was analyzing a piece of malware that had taken down 2 of their servers. Inside the code, he found a program that had been floating around the internet for roughly 10 years. Killdisk. It was called that because it wiped everything. It killed the disk. He also found black energy again, now being used to spread the virus to other machines. But there was a third component too: Mimicots, a tool exceptionally good at cracking passwords. And it was Mimicots that had let the attackers escalate their privileges and seize control of those 2 servers. This malware package could spread itself, steal credentials on its own, and on command, wipe every hard drive on every infected device. Soon, other Ukrainian companies started reporting incidents and malware detections. The Ukrainian railway system, the State Aviation Authority, Boryspil Airport, the country's largest, all infected. Infections were also discovered at 3 of the country's biggest power companies. And then, in December 2015, Hultquist's worst fears came true. In western Ukraine, a power station went dark. The outage hit roughly 230,000 people and lasted about 6 hours. Getting the systems back to normal took months. It was the first time in the entire history of cybersecurity that someone had used a cyber attack to cut off electrical power. For Yasinski, a line had been crossed, something on the level of a direct attack on civilians or using biological weapons against a population. It confirmed something deeply dangerous. Hackers could reach into the physical world and cause real harm. And it wasn't just Ukraine's problem. This could happen anywhere. On June 14, 2016, it was revealed that for months, 2 hacker groups with ties to Russian intelligence had been inside the servers of the Democratic National Committee. Within 24 hours of being detected, a Twitter account appeared, a figure calling himself Guccifer 2.0, claiming to be a lone hacker who had done it all himself. It was a smokescreen. Guccifer 2.0 presented himself as someone who idolized Edward Snowden and Julian Assange, a rebel fighting to tear down the establishment, leaking dirt on major political figures, ranting about the Illuminati. Following in the footsteps of the original Guccifer, who had broken into the email accounts of high-profile targets like Colin Powell, the Rockefeller family, and the sister of President George W. Bush. Analysts weren't buying it. CrowdStrike said it outright. Guccifer was a mask to throw investigators off Russia's trail. Guccifer pushed back, but the lie didn't hold. Inside the code were traces of Cyrillic text, and the machine it had been authored on listed its user as Felix Dzerzhinsky, the founder of Soviet secret police. This might not be as visually dramatic as a cyber attack launched in the hours before a military invasion, like what happened in Ukraine or Georgia, which Russia invaded in 2008. But make no mistake, the Guccifer 2.0 operation did affect the US election. By using WikiLeaks to release DNC emails in the middle of the campaign, Russian intelligence dealt serious damage to Hillary Clinton's reputation while giving a boost to her opponent, Donald Trump. There's no evidence the actual voting systems were compromised, and no proof Trump was being blackmailed by the Kremlin. But there is evidence that Russian intelligence ran an influence operation to benefit Donald Trump. It's not as flashy as a blackout, but a cyber actor can wear a lot of different masks, and some of those masks are just as dangerous. Meanwhile, Yasinski had left Starlight Media and moved to Kiev. What was happening with Sandworm felt like an existential threat to Ukraine, and defending a single company wasn't enough anymore. He joined ISSP, Systems and Security Partners, as Director of Digital Forensics. At the same time, a researcher named Robert Lee was tracking the blackouts and had come across a piece of malware unlike anything he'd ever seen. It was purpose-built to attack Ukraine's critical infrastructure, a virus that combined every tool Sandworm had been using up to that point. Black energy, mimikatz, kill disk, refined into something supposedly undetectable and impossible to stop. And there was one key upgrade. During the 2015 blackout, Sandworm's operatives had disconnected the generators manually, literally clicking on each thing they wanted to shut off. Now, that process was automated. This was an optimized system designed to tear through everything as fast as possible. The new malware was named Industroyer, though it's better known by its other name, Crash Override. With all of that on the board, Christmas 2016 arrived. Between December 14th and 17th, Sandworm unleashed a series of attacks with devastating consequences. In the first wave, critical Ukrainian targets began going down. The Treasury, the Ministry of Infrastructure, the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Economy. In many attacks, just like the year before, kill disk wiped everything clean. By scale alone, this attack had already eclipsed the one from the previous year, but there was something different this time. When the hard drive was wiped, a splash screen appeared, a Guy Fawkes mask. We are F Society. Join us. Yep, for those of you who caught that, F Society is the hacker collective from Mr. Robot. In a second wave, Sandworm dropped the movie references and got more aggressive. They locked down computers and demanded ransom, 222 Bitcoin, which at the time was about $150,000. The catch? There was no real way to decrypt the locked files. Whatever was infected was gone for good. Then on December 17th, 2016, they launched the final blow. At the Ukrainergo power station, a bank of indicator lights flipped from red to green, which, in engineer speak, means things just stopped working. The transmission systems and electrical transformers had gone offline. Crash Override was live. This station had been supplying over 200 megawatts, far more than the one targeted in 2015, and it was now dark. Fortunately, the timing worked in Ukraine's favor. The attack hit at midnight, and engineers managed to restore the systems within a few hours. When Yasinski found out, he called the SBU, Ukraine's equivalent of the CIA, and asked for permission to investigate. His first conclusion: Sandworm was behind it. But the most unsettling part wasn't the damage, it was the restraint. They could have done so much worse. They could have destroyed the computers running the plants. They could have sent massive electrical surges to burn out transformers and melt transmission lines, but for some reason they held back. His conclusion: they're playing with us. Ukraine isn't France or Germany. Most Americans couldn't even find it on a map. They're using it as a testing ground. Eternal Blue. That's the name of a critical Windows vulnerability that allowed attackers to execute code remotely. No authentication required. In plain terms, it gave you total control over any infected device. It was a vulnerability the NSA had been keeping secret until a hacker group called the Shadow Brokers leaked it to the world, along with a trove of other NSA tools. The moment Sandworm saw that Eternal Blue was out in the wild, they grabbed it and added it to their arsenal. So now the inventory looked like this: mimikatz for harvesting passwords, black energy for spreading across networks, Crash Override for seizing control of industrial systems, kill disk for burning everything down, and Eternal Blue to do whatever the hell else they wanted. Not everyone had updated their systems, they never do, and for Sandworm, with all these tools at its disposal, a single crack in the defenses was all it needed to flood the whole thing. Reminder guys, always update your devices. With all of this in place, Sandworm was ready to unleash what would become the most destructive cyber weapon in internet history. This time, they set their sights on a company behind a widely used Ukrainian accounting software called MEDoc. The hackers broke into the company's servers and installed a backdoor, a way to get back in whenever they wanted. The plan: infect MEDoc at the source, wait for the company to push out a routine update, and when users installed it, trigger the attack. And once again, a tiny crack, exploited to launch a massive invasion. On June 27th, Yasinski's phone started blowing up. Calls, texts from people all across Ukraine. Something had started tearing through private companies and government institutions. Nobody knew what it was yet. All they could see was that computers were shutting off one after another, then rebooting. Some screens read, "Repairing file system on C," while repairing nothing. Others displayed a ransom note. "Your important files are encrypted, demanding $300 in Bitcoin to get them back." At first, everyone assumed it was just ransomware. As you've probably guessed by now, it was something far worse. Over at Kaspersky, researchers noticed the virus bore some resemblance to Petya, a ransomware strain from early 2016. But just like before, there was no actual tool to decrypt the locked files. It looked like Petya. It wasn't Petya, so they named it NotPetya. NotPetya deployed every tactic and every tool the Kremlin's hackers had developed, and the results were catastrophic. One of the first major concerns was Chernobyl. The systems managing the nuclear waste could not go down. To avoid possible infection, operators disconnected the plant from the network entirely. Across the rest of Ukraine, desperate executives started making calls. Entire sections of the government network were cut off. The database tracking organ donors, the system managing patient treatment records, the platform handling public workers' salaries. The railway system went down. NotPetya wiped out the systems at Borispil Airport in Kiev. The National Postal Service crashed, which in Ukraine was especially brutal. The State Postal Service handles money transfers, manages subscription payments for things like newspapers, and distributes pension checks to over 4.5 million retirees. This didn't mean they could just pause and pick things back up later. It meant every single one of those functions now had to be done by hand, on paper. The attack infected more than 23,000 machines, many of which, investigators would later confirm, had been irreversibly destroyed. All data on them was gone. Banks were paralyzed. The few ATMs still working had lines stretching around the block, with strict cash limits. Some hospital machines running Windows ended up encrypted, with backups that were days out of date. Ambulance GPS systems were dead. The streets had gone unnaturally quiet. It's a massive cyber invasion, Yasinski said, and the carnage kept spreading. If you know anything about shipping ports, you know they move an enormous volume of cargo. You also know that all of it is coordinated by software, systems that tell cranes where to go, what to pick up, what to put down. NotPetya didn't spare the ports, and honestly, they weren't hard to infect. Some servers were still running Windows 2000. At 17 of Maersk's 76 terminals, Maersk being one of the world's largest shipping companies, the cranes had frozen solid. In Los Angeles, Algeciras, Rotterdam, Mumbai, tens of thousands of trucks sat waiting for cargo that never came, or turned around and drove back empty. The attack was eventually brought under control, mostly by taking machines offline and halting the ME-Doc update that had served as patient zero. A temporary workaround was also found. When NotPetya installed itself, it created a file called perf.dll or perf.dat, and that was the file containing the wiper. But here's the thing, if there was already a file called perf sitting on the Windows desktop, NotPetya wouldn't delete any data. The problem was that by the time they figured that out, most of the damage was already done. Placing that file on already infected machines did nothing. It was a preventive measure for the ones still standing. The final damage estimate, $10 billion, though many analysts say that figure is conservative, and that most companies either couldn't calculate the full losses or only disclose the minimum their investors legally required. After the dust settled, Yasinski discovered something strange. The perf file that prevented the wiper from activating was already present on some machines before the attack, which led him to a conclusion that still echoes today. Ukraine appears to have been the backdoor used to infect the world, and that door has not been closed. 6 months later, in January 2018, the first official attribution landed. A 424-word article in the Washington Post stated, Russian military was behind the NotPetya cyber attack in Ukraine, CIA concludes. The piece named a specific organization, the Main Center for Special Technologies, a division of the Glavnoye Razvedivatelnoye Upravlenie, the GRU, Russian Military Intelligence, specifically Unit 74455, operating out of Moscow, on Kurova Street, in the Khimki neighborhood, from Building 22, the one with the sign out front reading The Tower. And some of its officers were these individuals. I've given you a pretty specific address, and while I didn't make the trip myself, the journalist behind the book this video is largely based on, Andy Greenberg, did. He traveled to a hacker conference in Russia and broke the ice by asking straight up about the GRU. The answers he got were eye-opening. Some told him the Russian government didn't have sophisticated tools. They didn't even have the budget for something like that. Others flat out refused to speak with someone narrow-minded enough to believe Russia had taken down Ukraine's power grid. That grid, they said, would have collapsed on its own eventually. But one person admitted to having sold hacking tools to the government. He even said he'd sold them access to a 0-day subscription service and an exploitation kit, specifically designed to target industrial control systems. As for the rest of the world, the GRU was officially blamed for NotPetya. All the attacks covered in this video, the 2016 US election interference attempt, and the 2014 interference in Ukraine's elections. The Kremlin denied everything and called the accusations a hate campaign. The US imposed sanctions against 19 individuals and several companies that, on the surface, appeared to have no direct ties to the Kremlin. February 9th, 2018, Pyeongchang, South Korea. 35,000 people are ready for the Winter Olympics to begin. The organizing committee's IT team had set up over 10,000 computers, 25,000 mobile devices, 6,300 Wi-Fi routers, 300 servers in Seoul, and another 100 scattered around the world. When the opening ceremony kicked off, a man named Sang Jinho got a message. The IT team was running into some issues. It didn't seem like a big deal at first. Then the stadium Wi-Fi went down. Hundreds of televisions broadcasting the opening ceremony went dark. Every ticketing gate, every system scanning entries and exits stopped working. The official Olympics app crashed, and when they tried to restore everything from backup, the servers holding those backups wouldn't respond. They had run drills for everything beforehand. Cyber attacks, fires, earthquakes. They were supposed to be prepared. If they couldn't fix this within 2 hours, 35,000 people would be locked out of their hotel reservations, event schedules, and venue maps. If it wasn't fixed by the next day, the entire games would have to run blind, catering systems offline, ticketing readers dead. What worried them most above everything else was the international embarrassment. The servers didn't respond for the next 2 hours. Out of options, they cut the internet entirely. Then, with help from an outside firm, they clawed their way back. The first suspect, North Korea. But there was actually a solid reason to rule them out this time. During these games, North and South Korea had made a show of goodwill by fielding a joint women's hockey team. The next suspect, Russia. And here, the motive was airtight. Russia had been targeting Olympics-related organizations for years, retaliation for doping investigations that had banned Russian athletes from competing. And heading into these Winter Games, the International Olympic Committee had taken things further. Russia was banned outright. Individual Russian athletes could still compete, but not under the Russian flag, and without any national insignia. The virus, named for its intended target, was called Olympic Destroyer. The problem was, when analysts dug into the code, something strange turned up. Part of the code had fingerprints not of Sandworm, but of Lazarus, the North Korean hacker group. But there was more. Another section matched APT-3. Another matched APT-10, both tied to the Chinese government. This wasn't the first time Sandworm had played dress-up. There was Guccifer 2.0. There was F-Society. There were reasons to suspect them, but nobody could say for certain who was responsible. North Korea, China, Russia. In the middle of all that confusion, the Washington Post ran a story claiming it was North Korea. They were wrong. But by the time that became clear, the attribution had already circulated widely. Later, researchers traced the error to its source. The file's metadata header, which revealed the tools used to build the code, pointed to Lazarus. But digging deeper, they found the metadata had been faked. The Sandworm group became the first hacker collective in history to cause a real-world physical blackout. Their attacks have cost billions and brought critical public infrastructure to its knees. As far as anyone knows, the group is still active, operating under deeper layers of concealment with a far more subtle approach than in years past. Something similarly subtle has been happening with North Korea. Workers have been infiltrating Western companies, faking job interviews, falsifying their locations, landing positions illegally, all to funnel money back to the North Korean regime. And beyond the financial motive, there's a serious security risk. In some cases, these workers have leaked sensitive information or planted malware from the inside. And that's a wrap, guys. A little something different from the usual dark side of the internet country breakdowns. Did you dig this format? I'm still going to keep doing those, don't worry, but I figured it'd be fun to throw some other stuff into the mix every now and then. Catch you in the next one.